So welcome everybody. My name is Tom Guettler. I think Rick, you're probably the only one, and maybe Bev, but I think Bev, I've been at a couple of meetings. So I am semi-retired now, so I'm just working part-time, and I don't do technical assistance anymore. But up until December 31st, up until the end of last year, I was doing technical assistance with 7 communities, and Prairie Lake was one of those. Park Plaza was one of those. I was not doing Woodlawn because I wasn't involved in that. I was not doing Medelia because a couple other TAs were doing that. So I have a really deep background. I think I worked at NCF for about 11 or 12 years doing technical assistance. So I know pretty much everybody. I know the history. I know everything. And I just came back to do this because I did this last year, and I wanted to do it again. I mean, this particular session, because I think it's useful for people, especially new people like yourself, Rick, who may not be familiar with the co-op model, but even for people who have some background, like most of the folks here. So let me just talk about the agenda tonight. Oh, let's see, my keyboard stopped working, so I'll have to use my mouse. I'm going to begin with just a little bit of history of like cooperatives, like where we come from, like what's our legacy and how do we fit into that legacy. I'm going to go through some definitions just because in our business, we're used to using some terminology that not everybody may be familiar with. So I want to make sure that we're all on the same page there. I'm going to talk about roles in the co-op as applies mostly to you, members and board members, and then we'll do a wrap up. Please feel free to ask your questions as I go through the agenda, and I'm going to make some time for questions again at the end, but you don't have to wait, just interrupt. And Kathleen, what's the best way? Is it, are people familiar with raising their hand, or should they just pipe up?
They do both. And so
Okay.
Some of you know that in the reactions bar at the bottom of your screen, there's a little tab that raises a cartoon hand for you. But a lot of times people just raise their hand in like Natividad is demonstrating. Sometimes they just raise their hand in the frame, and sometimes they just pipe up. All
right. So what you can help me with, Kathleen, is, I may miss some cues from people. And if I miss something, I know you're not bashful, Kathleen. You'll interrupt me and let me know that I have a question that I missed. But before we begin, what I'd like to know is what each of you are hoping to get out of tonight's session. I mean, I'm assuming you've come here with some expectation, and I'm curious what you're hoping to get out of this, or if there's a question or maybe a couple questions that you want to make sure we get covered, that are covered tonight. And if I don't do it in this presentation, I'll make sure that we get it at the end as part of our wrap up. So let me start at the bottom. Marjorie, are you on?
I am. I just have a headache and a backache, so I probably won't be on camera much, but I am here listening.
Okay. So is there anything you want to get out of tonight, or is there a question or questions that you want to make sure we cover?
Nothing that I can think of right at this time.
Okay. Let me go on to Bev.
I'm here, and I'm probably the newest co-op president in the state. I know I am. And so this is all a learning curve. I'm at the beginning of the rung, bottom of the rung of the ladder. We closed December 30th. And I'm the board president and trying to learn as much as I can, as fast as I can. To get up
So
to speed.
you're just going to be a sponge tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How about you, Rick?
What I'm hoping to do is find out things about what does ROC and NCF do. I guess NCF, because you're the our TAs, or our immediate contacts, is what resources do you provide in order for us to find grants and financing for different projects.
Okay. Got it.
Basically, what is the role our TA.
All right.
Rick, would you also like to kind of know who's at NCF and what, what resources NCF provides in addition to just being a connector?
Yeah, it wouldn't be bad. I mean, it'd be nice, but I'm sure, we'll get to that in the rules because, I'm sure that Tom is, very up on all this.
All right. I got that down, Rick. How about that clan at Park Plaza?
Well, I'm looking for a refresher course here and maybe learn something new. Or maybe just relearn something I should know.
All right. Thanks, Carlton. Anybody else there?
Yeah, I want knowledge because I've never lived in a park before, and it's the first time I've ever been a member of anything. So this is all new for me.
So I see, could that be Edith?
Edie, you call me Edie.
Edie, got it. And anybody else that I can't see on camera? Natividad?
I'm right there with Carlton. I'm always game for a refresher. Sometimes you forget things and sometimes you don't even utilize certain things, right? Until it comes down to it and you go, oh, wow, I forgot how that works. So
Okay.
I'm always game to relearn. And Edie is actually a new director at large for our community, as well as a new member.
Okay. All right, well, let me jump in. Thanks for all of you. And if something comes up at the, as we go through this and you go, oh, geez, I forgot to say something, I'll give you time at the end to raise another question or questions. So let's go. First of all, this is the commonly accepted definition of a cooperative. It's an autonomous association of persons united voluntarily to meet their common economic, social, and cultural needs through a jointly owned and democratically controlled enterprise. So my question to you, anybody, in terms of your cooperative, what is the common need that your co-op, your housing co-op, is trying to meet?
Affordable housing and stable housing.
Got it? Anybody else want to add to that?
I do. We are trying to increase our population so that we can afford ourselves.
Reduce your vacancy, increase your
Yes.
occupancy, increase
Yes.
your revenue.
Yes.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought that up, Bev, because that's the business side of it, right? So you have, and we'll talk a little bit about it later, but as a cooperative, you have a mission, but you're also in business, and you're in business to make money so that you can grow and provide more services. So thanks for that.
For us, it would be to try to get to the point where we can have a storm shelter so we can have a safe place for our people to be during the storm.
So that need would be security, safety and security, right? Okay. Anything else before I move on? All right.
We
Just
want to improve the property also.
Okay. The
Infrastructure.
infrastructure itself.
Mhm.
Okay. So where did co-ops originate? They originated, now this is sort of like where everybody has sort of come down in terms of like, where can you pinpoint the origins? It was in England. And in 1800s England, there were more and more jobs that were being replaced by machinery because this was the Industrial Revolution. And as machinery took over the jobs, right, displaced people, more and more of those people who were skilled workers were being forced into poverty. So there was a group of 28 tradesmen, and they were weavers and skilled workers from other trades that formed a cooperative society. Now, they may not have called it a cooperative society, but that's in fact what it was, because they pooled their resources to open a store in 1844 that sold food items that they could not otherwise afford. So for them, it was a matter of literally of survival, because they didn't have enough work. and they pooled their resources so that they could buy food and resell at cost in their store. So as a resident of a manufactured home community, what do you have in common with these early co-op pioneers?
Poverty.
That's true, but also giving, having the ability to have a resource of a stable place to live.
Yeah, and I think, we're talking housing at cost, right? With the profit motive removed. So normally the profit would be going to an outside investor or an owner. And in this case, the idea is that you're operating at cost, which is what these folks back in England were doing too. So they were trying to eliminate that profit motive, right? That margin that somebody else was taking, and buy food cheaply, essentially. And in your case, I suspect it's you want affordable housing, and you're doing it at cost, which is the whole idea behind a housing cooperative, is to remove that profit motive. And if there is any profit, and there has to be some profit because you're a business, but it's going to go back into your business. It's not going to go to somebody else. And I'm sure if you're on the board of directors, you always get pressure from your members to be operating as close to cost as possible. They're very conscious of the cost of living, and that's the whole idea behind a housing cooperative. So let's just talk about some definitions. First of all, we refer to you as ROCs, or a resident-owned community. Now, ROC USA has ROC in its name because it's a resident-owned community USA. It's a national organization, and we're a local affiliate of ROC USA. But we're in the habit of referring to you as ROC. So if, like, internally now at NCF, we refer to you as ROCs. So if you hear us call you that, that's what we're talking about. You're a resident-owned community, which sets you apart from an investor-owned community, for example. So that's one of the definitions we use. We use the word cooperative to describe all resident-owned communities. Now, some of you are incorporated, depending on your state statute, as a cooperative corporation, and some of you as a nonprofit corporation. Now, I'm not going to get into why that came about. Whether you're incorporated as an actual cooperative or as a nonprofit, the thing I want to point out is we treat you as cooperatives, and we assume you're operating as a cooperative. So there's, the cooperative model has a set of principles that guide your operation, and all of you are functioning as cooperatives, whether or not you're incorporated as that. So let me just tell you, I'm looking down my list here. Madelia is incorporated as a cooperative. Park Plaza is incorporated as a cooperative. Prairie Lake is incorporated as a cooperative. Woodlawn is a nonprofit. So I think you're the only one, Bev, on this call anyway. And I think we have 3 or 4 of the communities we work with that are incorporated as nonprofits.
So, but give me a clarification. I know that, but we may be incorporated as, but we are a non, we do have a 501c3 IRS listing.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, Rick, because the 501c3 is an IRS designation, and you're whatever you can receive that designation whether you're a cooperative or a nonprofit. The IRS has a whole set of criteria that you must meet in order to, get approved by the IRS as a 501c3. And what that allows you to do, Rick, as a cooperative, is receive grants without having to have a fiscal agent. So the rest of you, if you want grant money, you have to go through another organization. Generally foundations, for example, will only make grants to 501c3 organizations. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds there, but, and I'm looking on the list, I think Zumber Ridge Estates has a 501c3 status, and I don't think anybody else does. It's really an onerous process. It takes a long time, takes a year or two. You know, it's a bureaucratic process. You know, it's the IRS. So yes, Rick, you've taken it one step further at Prairie Lake, and you have you're a charitable organization in the eyes of the IRS. And a lot of times the IRS doesn't look at housing co-ops as charitable organizations. So they made an exception in a couple of cases. You made your case and they said, yeah, we believe you.
So Tom, at some point we changed over to 308B. Is that correct? I can't remember.
Yeah,
offhand,
so yes, in
and why
Minnesota.
did we do that? I can't remember why.
So the original Minnesota statute, and I won't go too far into the details, but the original Minnesota statute was a 308A statute, right? Going way back. That's the cooperative statute in Minnesota. And so when cooperatives in Minnesota incorporated, it was under that statute. The problem was that it did not allow for investment of outside capital into the cooperative, because there was fear that there would be control, that the members of the cooperative would lose control. So as capital flowed into a cooperative, you know, investors usually expect some sort of control in return for their investment. So the problem with that original statute was that access to capital was limiting the growth of the cooperatives. And this was especially true for some of the bigger agribusiness and electrical co-ops, because they were trying to borrow money, and investors were reluctant to do that because they didn't have any piece of the action so far, right? So there was another statute that was developed, the 308B statute, which allowed for an outside investor. Now, in the case of Park Plaza and some other Minnesota cooperatives, I think all of the communities now that we work with that are cooperative, incorporated as cooperatives, are 308Bs if they're incorporated as a co-op, which gives, in this case, particularly Rock Capital, your lender, a vote. So the bylaws of the 308B cooperatives are written so that, in this case, the bank, the lender, has some degree of control over what happens in the cooperative, and it's written into the bylaws. So they're non-members. The lender is a non-member. They're the only non-member you have that has that level of control. Yeah, Beth.
We are a 317A.
That's a nonprofit statute.
Okay.
So that's the state statute that governs nonprofit incorporation. Yeah, and I know this can be confusing as soon as we talk about corporate statuses. So, and then if we bring the IRS into it, it gets even more complicated. But that's a good point. 317A is the nonprofit statute. All right. I mentioned some of this, right? Whether you're incorporated as a cooperative or a nonprofit, you're a business, and to survive, you have to make a profit. And any profit that you make is added back to your reserves. That's generally the practice, which eliminates or at least reduces drastically your tax liability. So the way the statutes are written is that, you know, if you're a member governed organization and if you have a profit at the end of the year, you can put that profit back into your reserve account and avoid paying taxes, income taxes, as a corporation on that income. Does that make sense? So provided you don't, like, if you were to turn around and give your members checks, that might make a difference, right? So not because now you're distributing a profit to members. It's not going back into the corporation, it's going to individuals. So in every case that I know of, at the end of the year, the accountant will transfer any net profit back into your reserve account. And this is an accounting entry, right? But it's also going to show up in your reserve account. Your reserve account would grow if they did that.
Natividad, is that a raised hand or an applause hand?
That's a raised hand. It keeps taking it off.
Okay.
I have a question then.
Okay.
So we recently had to sell a house that was abandoned and we made a $3,800 profit. Does that need to be transferred over to the reserve account? And we have a second house which was supposed to go up for sheriff's sale, has now been told to us that it is going to be signed over to us and we have to sell it, which will make a profit on that as well because it was an abandoned home. So will that also need to go into the reserve account?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think in other co-ops that I've worked with, right, because I worked in the ag co-op industry for a while, and a lot of times the tax implication has to do with whether or not the benefit went to members or non-members. So if you or if the income was derived from member or non-member income, right? So in your case in Tividad, this is non-member income, right? It's income from a source other than members paying lot rent.
Right.
And so it's non-member income. So that may have a tax implication. And I'm saying may because a CPA is the one who's going to be able to tell you that.
Okay.
But I guess I'd be prepared for that because it's in most cooperatives, you know, the question is, what's the source of the income? Is it from members or non-members? Like where did the benefit accrue?
To abandoned houses. So I think what I'll do is I'll call Carrie and ask her outright. Because I don't want to wait till the last minute to decide, oh yeah, by the way, maybe we need to transfer this money. And then that looks suspicious too. So if you do it ahead of time before you get to April of next year, I think that would probably be a better idea. Right. But thanks for the information because that's a really good thought, you know.
When you talk to her, ask her if it makes a difference if you do it on this calendar year, this tax year, or next tax year, as long as you do it before April 15th.
Right. Yeah, it would have to. That's a perfect example of everything you should know before you ask her, right? Perfect. Thanks.
So just to review, no matter how you're incorporated, you are a business, and you're expected to make a profit. There is nothing wrong with making a profit. Even nonprofits like NCF have to make a profit. I mean, we have to, in order to stay in business, we need to make a profit. Our mission is critical, and that's why you may sometime hear both co-ops and nonprofits being referred to as having a double bottom line. So in a for-profit corporation, for example, most corporations or investor-owned businesses, they're motivated entirely by profit. Now they may feel like they're trying to do some good in the community, right? But they don't have a mission statement. Their whole thing is to look at the bottom line and make a profit. As cooperatives, we have a double bottom line. One is to serve our members, and on the other hand, as a business, make a profit. And so that's no matter how you're incorporated, right? Those are guiding principles, and you're owned by and accountable to your members, no matter how you're organized, how you're incorporated. Let's talk about cooperative principles. Whether you're, again, no matter how you're organized, you're all operating under a set of cooperative principles. And the neat thing is that cooperatives all over the world operate under the principles that I'm going to show you. And it's kind of cool because as members of a housing co-op, you're members of a worldwide community of cooperatives. So if you went to Canada or Italy or someplace in Asia, or I mean, it doesn't matter. If you see some organization that's organized and they call themselves a cooperative, you have 7 things in common with them. And the first is voluntary and open membership, which means anybody can join. There are no restrictions on who can become a member of a cooperative. Now, in your case, they have to be homeowners. They can't be renters. So there is one restriction in your bylaws that's put there by the lender in most cases, because in order to get the access to money, they have to say, you know, the whole purpose of this business is affordable home ownership, not affordable home renters. It's affordable home ownership. So that's, I think, the only restriction you have on your membership. The second is what we call democratic member control, which means that members control the business. The board doesn't, the bank doesn't, although they have some, you know, restrictions in terms of the loan agreement, but the whole concept here is it's controlled by members. Members invest in and benefit from the activities of the cooperative. And in this case, it's housing cooperative. So, you know, there's a member benefit piece. Autonomy. And this isn't so big a deal for you or for most co-ops in North America, but in many other parts of the world, there's some pressure to be operated by governments or other entities that don't necessarily have members, the best interest of members. So we're, you know, culturally, we're not really familiar with this because we don't have to worry about this, but in some other parts of the world, this is a problem where governments want to own and operate the organization, the entity, right? So this is important for a lot of other cooperatives in other parts of the world. Education, which means co-ops provide education to members, which is what we're doing here tonight. And probably what, you know, what you're like is at the top of your mind all the time is to educate members about what it means to be part of a community that's structured as a housing cooperative. And finally, well, not finally, we have one more after this, cooperation among cooperatives. So you, again, you are, as a resident-owned community in this network working with us, you're part of a network of other housing cooperatives in Minnesota and Wisconsin, and maybe someday in other states. And so you have a peer network that you can rely on for support and education and learning and whatever else you choose to do as part of this network. And finally, concern for community, which means there's an emphasis on co-ops contributing to their community, to the common welfare, not just of the manufactured home park that you live in, but the broader community. So it's like service to community. Any feedback or comment on any of this?
Natividad?
Go ahead.
Okay, Carlton had a comment on number 1.
It says voluntary and open membership. You mean for people that have lived here before it was a co-op? Because those who join, who come into the co-op now, they have to join. It isn't voluntary.
Well, you're right. You're right. And that's also a function of the bylaws, that a restriction that the lender put in place. So I'm glad you mentioned that, because there really are 2 restrictions. One is they can't be renters, and 2, they have to be a member when they join, when they live in the community. So yes, you're correct.
Okay.
So in that sense, I guess that is involuntary, because if you want to live there, you have to be a member of the co-op.
Yeah,
Good
so
point.
it kind of changes number 1 a little bit depending
does.
upon your situation.
Yep.
But these are the average 7 that you talk about the most.
Yep. So let's talk about types of co-ops. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but I just want you to be aware of where you fit into the world of cooperatives. We break down the types of co-ops based on essentially how they operate and who they serve. And the first type of cooperative is what we call a producer or a marketing co-op, which is Land O'Lakes, Crystal Sugar, Ocean Spray, Organic Valley, Sunkissed. These are all, in most of these cases, right, they're agricultural co-ops, and they've banded together in order to market their goods. right? So they have some control over the price they receive for their products. Bottom line.
So it's not a co-op from the ground up. It's a co-op only for the purposes of marketing their product.
Correct. Yep. And in some of these cases, right, let's say they're marketing grain, like Cenex Harvest Stage, CHS is huge, right? They're probably in the top 100 in terms of, you know, their gross revenue. They're really big. They have a worldwide network. They're shipping grain all over the world. On the flip side of that, their farmer members have access to the inputs that go into growing that product also. So CHS is going to buy fertilizer and seed and ag chemicals and whatever else these farmers need to grow their crop, right? And they're going to get it at a good rate because CHS is buying in bulk. They're buying train loads of this stuff or barge loads or whatever. And on the flip side, they're selling train loads and barge loads and ship loads of grain all over the world, right? So they're having cheaper inputs, you know, it's low cost and high margin on the selling side. That's the whole idea behind some of these really big co-ops. There are a lot of consumer co-ops. Before I go on, one of the reasons that the upper Midwest, Minnesota and Wisconsin in particular, are such strongholds of the cooperative movement is because we have a deep history of cooperative movements because of immigrants who came here, who got into farming, right, and brought the expectation of like cooperative unions. And so way back, these farmers organized cooperatives because they came from countries that were more socialist in leaning, you know, and they were used to organizing themselves in this way. And so Minnesota and Wisconsin in particular have a deep history with cooperatives because of the immigrant culture that was established here, and they brought those expectations and those principles with them because they had been used to organizing themselves that way. Consumer co-ops. You know, there are a lot of food co-ops in the Twin Cities, for example. Those are organized as food co-ops because they're selling to their members, and in this case, their food. REI, which is recreational equipment. There are a lot of electrical co-ops. If you live in a rural area, you're probably receiving your electricity from an electrical co-op, which were established in the 30s. Housing co-ops, which you are. Credit unions are really a form of a consumer co-op. So these are all co-ops where there are individual members or consumers who are benefiting from whatever it is the cooperative is doing.
So that's like a lot of the food co-ops started off as buyers clubs. So they found that there was strength in numbers basically when they wanted to purchase. They wanted the same benefit of being a big fish in a smaller pond, essentially.
Correct. Yeah, the purchasing power, bulk purchasing power. Worker co-ops, equal exchange is an example of that. And Kathleen, are you familiar with any other local co-ops that are organized as worker co-ops?
No, but I think that it's worth pointing out that it is different than things that are employee owned. So like Hy-Vee Grocery, which is big, newly big in the Twin Cities, but has a big footprint in southwestern Minnesota in particular. They are theoretically worker owned, but they are not a cooperative. And so there is some difference between those two things.
Yep, you'll see that they call themselves employee-owned companies. And they are not cooperatives, you're correct. They are employee-owned, but they're not cooperatives. And finally, there are purchasing cooperatives, and Ace Hardware is an example of that because they're organized solely for the purposes of purchasing, you know, at a reduced cost. You know, so unlike a ag co-op or a producer co-op, for example, they're not selling anything. They're not looking for any advantage in terms of what they're selling. They're looking for an advantage in terms of what they buy to resell. So Ace Hardware is the best example I can think of a purchasing co-op. So
Tom,
they're yeah, go ahead.
Sorry. I just looked up how many cooperatives are in the US. It says 29,000 cooperatives operate in every sector of the US economy. 1 billion people are members of cooperatives worldwide. 1 billion, that is a ton of people.
Some of those
Exactly.
people are members of more than one co-op, I would bet.
I am.
Yeah. Let's talk about what all co-ops have in common. Whatever, you know, on the previous screen, whatever type of co-op you are, they all are owned by their members. And members have invested some amount of money in the co-op, so they've got an interest in making sure that the co-op meets their particular needs. Each member owns a share in the corporation, you know, at whatever cost, which entitles them to some privileges, such as service on the board and voting and, you know, making decisions, being part of the decision making, essentially. They're all member controlled. Each member has one vote, and that's unique in the cooperative world. So it doesn't matter how big a lot you have, how much business you do with the co-op, you know, regardless of the size of your family or your dwelling, it doesn't matter. It's like one member, one vote. And the board is always elected by members and is accountable to members. So member control is huge. And finally, member benefit. The purpose is to provide, in your case, housing to members. And the lot rent that you charge reflects only the actual cost of running the co-op. And you're always under pressure to keep that affordable. That's the benefit members are looking for from you, is affordable and safe and secure housing. Okay. Just to give you some idea where you fit into the co-op housing world, there are different types of housing co-ops. And one of them, and this is what most co-ops in the US especially are structured as market rate co-ops, where members buy and sell their share at market rates. And they expect to realize a gain when they sell their share. So if you went to California or Florida, for example, there are a slew of housing co-ops. A lot of them are retirement communities. And when somebody sells a home in one of those communities, they're selling their home at market rate. And they're allowed to receive whatever profit they can realize from the sale of that home. So it's the share is one price, right, to belong to the member co-op, but when they actually sell their home, you know, it's at market rate. And so their bylaws allow them to sell their share essentially at whatever the market is going to bring. So they can make a lot of money. They'll hold their house for, you know, 5 or 10 years, and you know, the value goes up. They can make a lot of money when they sell their home in their co-op. A lot of the co-ops in New York are that way. They're structured as co-ops, and they're market rate co-ops.
Was that why the practice of limited equity co-ops was established then?
Yep. There we go. So in order to keep the housing affordable, this type of co-op was structured, right? And this is not reflected in the corporates, like at the state level, right? The way this stuff works is it's all defined in the bylaws. So whatever you're looking at a housing co-op, you got to look at their bylaws, and it's going to tell you essentially what limits there are on the profit you as a member can make from selling your share in the cooperative. So yes, so there was like some pressure to limit the profit that somebody could make, because then the housing is no longer affordable, right? Somebody buys in 20 years ago, it's like the housing market. It pretty much follows the housing market. So limited equity means that members are limited. There's some formula to the amount of gain they can realize on the sale of their share in that co-op. And then finally, there's what we call a zero equity co-op, which means members cannot make any gain on the sale of their share when they move out. So knowing this as a resident-owned community and knowing what you know about how you operate, what type of co-op do you think you all belong to?
Come on, folks, I don't want to answer.
All right, anybody but Natividad.
I guess okay, I have a question, or I guess need some clarification.
Okay.
When you say, we talked about the share, we're talking about the money we paid in originally to become a member of the co-op?
Yes, we're not talking about, you know, your house, because you
Okay.
you could sell your house for
Then-
more money.
Well, then leave you as zero equity.
You're exactly right. Yeah. So no matter what, you know, you can buy and sell your house at whatever price, but the share in the actual co-op is fixed. It's a fixed amount. It's not going to change unless members vote to change that share amount, and they can do that, but it's fixed. So whether you're making, you can make $30,000 on the sale of your house, but we know when you sell your share in the corporation back to the co-op, it's fixed.
And it's something to watch out for. I mean, or to be aware of, I should say, not watch out for. That makes it sound too cautionary. Like I belong to a food co-op and I have belonged for many years. And so what I purchased my share for was, I think, $80, and I think they sell now for $120. So if I decided to leave that co-op, I could ask for that to be refunded to me, and it would be refunded not for the 80 I paid for it, but for the 120, which is the going rate now. And I think that qualifies as a limited equity. It's not the kind of thing that I'm going to advertise on Craigslist and see how much I can get for it.
Yeah, and you know, the reason your bylaws are written this way, because the restriction on the equity is written into your bylaws, and it's written that way again because the lender, when they're going out looking for money to lend to you, is saying this money is going toward the maintenance and the preservation of affordable housing. And the best way of maintaining affordable housing in a cooperative is that you cannot make a profit on the sale of your share. They don't have any, they can't restrict what you can sell your home for, right? But they can restrict what you can sell your share for. And that's the way your bylaws are written. All right, let's talk about who owns what here. What does a co-op own? Well, the co-op owns all the real estate, all the land. It includes the land under and around the homes and all the common areas. That's one thing they own. They own everything underground, which is water, sewer, electric. I don't know if you know, it had cable underground, whatever it is. The co-op owns everything that's underground and everything that's above ground, exclusive of the homes. So that includes all the buildings, sidewalks, roads, utility poles, trees, whatever. So if the thing to keep in mind here is if anything goes wrong with any of this stuff, whether it's above ground or underground, the co-op is responsible for it, unless your bylaws say differently. In most cases, though, the cooperative is responsible for all of this. And any government entity treats you as a private enterprise. And to date, none of the communities we work with have infrastructure that is owned by a municipality. In other words, if something goes wrong with your water line, you're responsible. The city's not going to fix it. Something happens to your electric, it's your problem. So they consider you a private enterprise, not a public entity. You're a private enterprise, and whatever goes on inside the boundaries of your property is the co-op's responsibility. So that's one disadvantage of, of living within a manufactured home community, is that the municipality considers you private property and they have nothing to do with you. Any question about that?
It sounds like we live on the moon.
I guess my question would be is regarding like say, water, sewer, electric. I water and sewer, yes, but electric, that's still, I mean, at least here, it's still governed by the actual utility company. They're still responsible for the from the the transformer, because they still own the transformers.
Oh, okay. On the poles. Do you have poles in your
Well,
park? I can't
actually,
remember.
we don't have any poles. We're all underground. But so we have the transformers. The little boxes sit here and there. On the ground in the yard. So but yeah.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, you're unique in that way.
And the same thing with cable. Because the cable comes in. And they go to their cable boxes, and they're responsible for maintaining service to the home, to the subscriber.
Right.
So that's I mean, water and sewer, yeah, we're stuck with that. There at least the yeah.
So you have a unique situation, and in that case, Rick, you're right. You have some other circumstances that the city will cover. What do members own? Well, everybody, whether they're a member or non-member, owns their home. I'm assuming, they may have a contract for title on their home, but they're considered homeowners unless they rent a home that's owned by the co-op. Because some of you have some apartments or homes that are rented out. But in most cases, if it's a manufactured home, I don't believe any of you have any manufactured homes that are rentals. Is that true?
We have some still. I think we have 6 left.
That are rentals?
They're non-members.
They're non-members, correct?
Yeah.
But they're not renters.
No.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay, that can be, that's confusing because I know we have one home in our community that is, it's actually I don't know who owns it anymore because the owner passed away, so basically so probably his estate still owns it, but the people living there rent from that estate, not from the co-op.
Yeah, and you can get into, the weeds on that because I'm familiar with what you're talking about, Rick. It's like somebody owns the home and they haven't sold it yet and they don't want to sell it. And so they're letting, somebody else live there and they're paying rent to the person who's supposedly the owner of the home. And yeah, like how do you control that sort of thing? It's difficult. But
Can't that be controlled by your bylaws by not subleasing?
well, they're not supposed to be subleasing, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But people do it, and then you catch them doing it, and what are you going to do? Your alternative is to evict them, and you're evicting not the people who are living there, but the people who own the home.
Right. We've had to do that with one of our homes.
Yeah, it's a messy process, and it's usually it's like, are they paying rent? Are they good neighbors? Are they not breaking the rules? How far do you want to push it? Are you going to give them, maybe they need a few months?
Lucky for us, they were breaking the rules and it worked out. So, and the only other renting thing we have is that house.
So the other thing that members own is a share in the co-op, which gives them the right to participate in all the decision making and receive in any share of the profits that might be distributed. And to my knowledge, I think the only time there's been any profit that's been distributed was Prairie Lake. A previous board did this one time. They made a distribution to members. I think there may be one other case, and I can't remember which other community, but this is pretty rare where any profits are actually distributed in the form of cash or a check. Usually that money goes back into the reserve account, the community, for improvements to the community, not for the benefit of individual members. What's the resident's role? Whether they're a member or a non-member, they're responsible for abiding by the terms of the occupancy agreement and the community rules. And if the members own a share in the co-op, they're responsible for participating in the affairs of the co-op. And these responsibilities, we can go, we do entire like multi-hour sessions on what this means, because we start breaking down what your bylaws actually say. So we could go really deep on this and we could spend hours on this one, but I think the point is, the role and responsibilities of residents and members is outlined in your bylaws. And that's the first place to look, is your bylaws. The board's role is to be accountable to the members and make decisions on behalf of and that benefit the membership. And again, exactly how that works is outlined in the bylaws.
How well it works is up to the people who are voting.
Who show up to vote. Exactly.
Yeah, that's true.
Here's something that I'm sure you have some questions about, and this I will go a little bit deeper on this one. Like, what's the lender's role here? Well, the lender, whether it's Rock Capital or a bank or a credit union or whoever it is, their goal is to advance their mission. If they're lending to you, that is their mission, because you're considered affordable housing, and their mission is to promote and protect affordable housing. And they want to protect their investment because they're a bank. They don't want to lose money. They don't want you to default on your loan. So while they believe in the right for you to have affordable housing, they want to protect their investment, and they want to make money. They're a business. They're going to make money off that loan. And the terms of that relationship between the lender and borrower, between the bank and you, are outlined in the loan agreement. And for example, if you look at your loan agreement, it's a long document, but generally what it tells you is the dollar amount and the term and the interest of the mortgage that you have with them. It has the details of the reserve account, how and what the reserve accounts are, and how the money goes into and out of those reserve accounts, how they expect you to pay on this mortgage, which is principal and interest. So the exact terms. There are some metrics that they're expecting you to meet, which is the job of the technical assistance provider. So to answer one of your questions, Rick, earlier, is like, what's our role as a technical assistance provider? We have a set of metrics that are outlined in that loan agreement, and the lender is expecting you to perform, and we report back to the lender on those metrics, essentially on your financial performance. And they review that, and that happens every month. So every month, the financial statements are going to the lender, and also we're interpreting them. So they have a list of criteria, a list of metrics, we call them. It's like, are you meeting the terms of your loan agreement? And we have to specify exactly how that's happening. And if it's not happening, why isn't it happening? So that's what we call our responsibilities as a loan servicer, right? So we're servicing your loan, and we have a contract with the lender to do that. So we get paid to do that. That's a source of income for us. For the term of your loan, we get paid to service it. In return, we have to provide, the information that they're asking for. So that's the time and the energy that we have to put into the relationship.
But I think it also gets to Rick's earlier question about the early repayment penalty, because what you said is they're counting on the interest that you're paying, that the communities are paying each month, is part of their income stream as a business entity.
Right. This loan agreement also has the requirements for insurance, right? So they're specifying exactly how much insurance you have to carry, how you're managed. So they have restrictions on what kind of relationship you have with a property manager or an accounting firm or CPA or whatever, right? So they say, this is what that business, like the property manager, has to be able to provide for you. And they have to approve it. So if you changed property managers or accountants, the lender has to approve that, because they want to make sure that it's a reputable organization, right? That they're going to get the reports on time, that the manager is doing their job correctly, that they know what their job is, right? So there's a whole list of criteria that have to be met by that outside person. Yeah, so all this is in the loan agreement. So next to your bylaws, the thing that we in NCF have to know pretty well is the terms of your loan agreement, because in every case, they're a little bit different. For each one of you, they're a little bit different. And if you ever want to look at it, that loan agreement, it's not confidential, you're entitled to look at that loan agreement. and we can help you interpret some of that stuff if you have a question about it. So what's our role? Our role is to advance our mission, which is to help develop more cooperative enterprises. And in your case, specifically, it's cooperative housing. So that's our mission, is, expand the world of cooperatives, and especially housing cooperatives in the manufactured home communities. And we provide that support, whatever it takes. Usually we try to draw some boundaries around that, but our job is to provide you with the support that you need to be a successful business. And not just in business, but also in terms of a cooperative, because that means you're serving your members. So that's the other piece of you being successful. So our mission is to transform lives and communities through cooperative enterprise. And we have a technical assistance agreement with you, which spells out the details of the relationship that we have with you. So I won't go into that. I mean, that's not a very long document. That was signed at the time you became a resident-owned community. But we do have an agreement with you. So we have an agreement with you. We have an agreement with the lender, which outlines the relationship that we have. So those agreements really govern the relationship that we have with you and with the lender.
Well, you are supposed to retire then.
I'm still working. I'm still an employee. I'm just not doing the same thing.
Okay, question on about the technical assistance agreement. Now, is that a boilerplate through all the, throughout the all their communities, or is that a specific to each community?
Well, yeah, it's an agreement with each community, but in terms of the terms of that agreement, they're all pretty much the same, Rick.
Okay.
They're pretty much the same.
What are some of the highlights?
Whoa.
They get to know us.
Well,
Wait,
again, there's always a downside to every job.
oh, that's because they know us.
In some ways, Rick, I think that they're all very similar because they are part of the terms of your loan agreement. And so the funder is governing some of those.
No, I understand that. I'm just saying, what are some of the highlights of a technical assistance agreement? What is their role other than being, what do you guys, what do you do to earn your money?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and it really, I think to Kathleen's point, in a lot of ways, it mirrors what is required of you or us by the lender, which is things like we have to make sure that you have a relationship with some outside entity that provides accurate and timely financial statements, and we have to be responsible for making sure that those financial statements are generated and get to the lender on time. And we have to provide, we have to ensure that you as the board of directors know what those things, what's going on there, right? That you have the help you need to be able to interpret that and understand whether or not you're a successful business. It gets down to, like, we have to attend meetings. We have to, if there's details about the community that we have to know, because we have to provide an annual report to them. So it's things like, what's the nature of the infrastructure in your community? What kind of condition is it? How is the board operating? Is the board operating, period? And are they successful? Are they able to meet the requirements of the loan agreement and their members, and it's stuff like that. So it's really like almost in many ways, it's a mirror of exactly what the loan agreement is, but the lender says we're their proxy. And so they're saying, take that loan agreement, and NCF, you're responsible for it. So they're not going to go to you if there's a problem, unless it gets to be serious, which has happened in a couple instances. So, they may say that your accounts receivable has to be, within these boundaries. And if they're not, they're going to come to us first and go, why is it that way? Like, what's going on out there? And if it gets really bad, they'll go to you, the board of director. Well, you're not on the board, Rick, but they'll go to the board. So it's that level. They expect us to know pretty much everything that's going on in the community.
So I have a thought, quick.
Go ahead.
I kind of look at it as like having a mom and dad, basically, to oversee your life. Because you think about when you become a co-op, in the beginning, you have an interim board, and say your interim board consists of 7 people who have never been on a board before, never ran a corporation whatsoever, and know nothing about bank statements on a corporation side, financials, taxes, the whole 9 yards. Without NCF or a particular TA provider, a CTAP, as they call them in New Hampshire, imagine trying to run your community just thrown together and had no direction. So without NCF, you can't even imagine what it would be like. I'm so thankful we have them, because although I did run a business and knew a little bit of the background, my background was not heavy enough to run a $4 million corporation by myself, plus all the other board members that had never done it before. So it's so important to have this above and beyond anything else you could imagine, because I don't know how it would even run itself.
I think in some ways that the parent role is fulfilled by the board, but we're like the coach. We're the parent support group.
Yeah, you could say that. I always think, oh, mom and dad.
Yeah, and I think that's the way I would put it too, Kathleen, is we're a coach. And I think it helps to know too what the limits to our authority are, because
Yeah.
We have no ownership interest in your business, in your community. We have no ownership interest. We are not the lender. We're under contract to the lender, but we are not the lender. And so most of the time we're like the compliance officer,
Pretty
that, ensures you adhere to the terms of your loan agreement. I mean, that's the business, the transactional side of it. Now, that's the kind of stuff that's outlined in the loan agreement, because ultimately the lender has all the authority. Now, the other role that we have, Rick, that you're probably not going to see in any agreement is, like, what does it really take for us to be successful, for you to be successful? Because you're a community of people. You're not a community of transactions. You're a community of people who are in relationship with the issues that you face have to do with, you know, being a community and the relationships or the conflicts that you have. And that's not in the loan agreement. That's not in the contract that we have with you. But if you're going to be successful, it means that we have to be like the community organizing entity in some respects. I mean, we're like the social service people sometimes, you know, we're therapists, we're all that stuff that it takes for you to be successful, which goes beyond just people paying the rent and making sure the money gets to the bank. I mean, that's all transactional stuff. So the stuff that's not in that agreement it's the people side of it that we have to be good at, which makes our job difficult because, you know, we have to be able to manage the transactions with the lender and be their proxy, that's what they care about. They care about getting their money and getting it on time. We have to understand what's really going on in your community, like what's really going on and what can get in the way of you being a successful resident-owned community.
And
That's the human piece of this.
to be a good counselor too, we need to understand what's going on in your community.
Yep. That's our role.
That's a big role.
Yeah. And, you know, finally, there's another entity that's involved in this, and that's your property manager or accountant, right? Depending on how you're set up, what that relationship is. And the point is, what I want to make is that they're an employee of the cooperative. They're not our employee. They're not an employee of the lender. They're an employee of the cooperative. And they're accountable to the board of directors. And there's always a contract that governs that relationship. And there are many times where the property manager or the accountant isn't doing their job. And, you know, it's difficult because the lender says they have to do their job and they're expected to do their job. And if they're not, as TA providers, we can't go to them and go, you know, we can ask them questions and go, geez, is there any way you can get this stuff done on time, or there's a problem, they're not accurate or whatever, right? But ultimately, because you hired them, the board of directors hired them, they're accountable to the board of directors. So we can put pressure on them, but ultimately they're your employee. And you have a contract with them. So they're the other entity that you have to deal with. You know, you're dealing with the lender, with NCF, and you're dealing with the property manager or accountant.
I need a vacation.
Well, that's what I had on my agenda for you, and we covered a lot of territory. And I'm probably, you know, I think the sign of a good session is that we've left you wanting more. I'm hoping it's not too much more, but I'm hoping in some ways that we just kind of like tickled your curiosity about some of this and open the door a peek. And there's no way in an hour and a half that we can answer all the questions about like what it means to be a cooperative, but I hope, you know, I hope we gave you a little bit of a peek in there. So we do have some time for some questions, if you have some.
Yes. What a surprise, right? Okay, one is as far as who has authority to contact the TA?
Well, there's two answers to that, Rick. You know, the authority, what we prefer, and I don't think this is in any contract. What we prefer is the board of directors because they're the ones that are ultimately responsible or accountable. But we do get contacted by members and non-members directly. And generally, when that happens, there's an issue with the board of directors. You know, a member or non-member has an issue and they don't feel that it's been addressed appropriately. And then our job is to go back to the board and go, we need to work on this. So that becomes our job. So we hope it's usually the board that's coming to us with an issue or a problem, but we do get contacted by members or non-members, and we stay out of it. I mean, it's really dangerous if we get involved with solving an issue that a member or a resident has. So our job is to, deflect that and work with the board to address whatever that issue or concern is. Does that answer your question? Does that
Yes,
make sense?
that does answer my question. Thank you very much. Next question is regarding resources. I have, I'm fortunate that I have a talent to be able to write grant proposals. Like I can write a grant, no problem. But I don't know how to find them. Does our TA have the resources to be able to guide us in the right direction to find the grants we need?
Maybe.
Well,
And
does NCF have anything in their little bag of tricks that have somebody on their staff that would be able to find does grant searching?
yeah, so I'm going to answer this, and then Kathleen, you can follow up with this. All right. So we've been most successful at doing this in Minnesota because we've been lobbying at the state legislature now for, I don't know, 4, 5, 6 years, something like that, to get more funding from the state for, in particular, manufactured home parks, because the state has always been funding through various programs, and the federal government too, right? They've been funding affordable housing in the form of apartments for renters. A lot of money goes into this kind of stuff. Like there's a lot of investor-owned affordable housing. They have historically not done very well at funding manufactured home parks, which are affordable housing. And so we've been successful lately at the state legislature in Minnesota, getting them to pony up money, big money for infrastructure improvements, because as soon as you start looking at replacing sewer and water lines, and the Tivadad knows this, we're talking millions of dollars. It's money with 7 zeros behind it. So, nobody has access to that kind of funding. And so in the last couple of years, we've been successful getting the state to open up some of the money that they normally would just go to affordable housing in bricks and mortar, and going toward improvement projects in manufactured home communities. Now that's a result of the lobbying that we've done at the legislature. We have, just because we're a Minnesota-based corporation, nonprofit, we haven't been done that in Wisconsin. Now, I think there may be some work, and I'm not aware of this, Kathleen. Is there any work that, any relationships we're building in Wisconsin to like access that kind of funding?
I'm not up on the advocacy piece, and I don't even know if, well, Rick, you're on that ROC Association committee for the advocacy. I would say that it depends upon what you are looking to fund. So I know last night you had some kind of discrete things on your wish list. And for things like either the pier or the dog park, things that have a beginning, a middle, and an end, as it were, those are project grants. And you can look for entities that are interested in underwriting that. And I think one of the best places, or a place to start anyway, would be at a local research library. So near you, let's see, it might be Milwaukee. It's usually a pretty major municipal library, and you want to talk to a research librarian, and they'll walk you through their database of funders, and you can put in search words. But as far as I know, not every library has that. Like in Minnesota, there's 4 libraries that have that capacity, and they're kind of spread out across the state. So I'm guessing that Milwaukee would be the one. I don't know now if you can do that online. I would guess you can. I've been out of that role for about 12 years, so I'm guessing that that has been technologized. But that might be a great place to start.
And thank you very much for that. But my question is, I guess, my comment would be then is, why does not NCF have somebody who is dedicated to seeking out grants and funding for, for project grants for, the communities, when it would be a great, great asset to the money we pay you?
Well, I can say that up until a few months ago, there were 3 people at NCF, and so that's a big reason why. And we have added a person who is doing some grant work on our behalf, and by extension, it would be on behalf of communities. And I think that right now, she's kind of still getting her sea legs. And she might have capacity to review a grant, but I'm not sure how much grant researching she can do. It is time consuming, as you might guess, or as you probably know if you have tried.
Yeah, and the somewhat cynical answer to your question, Rick, is that we don't get paid by the lender to do that. And we can only do what we get paid to because we're all paid employees.
I mean, there are freelance grant writers that your community could hire to do that work. I don't really know what their prices are. I'm sure they're all over the ballpark. You could, in fact, talk to some people and see if someone will write grants and research grants. Well, you said you can do the writing part. If you can hire somebody to do the research part for a percentage, that's pretty hard to find, quite honestly. Most people charge a flat fee because if you don't get the grant, then there's no percentage to be had. But that does exist out there.
So Rick, I don't want to shut you down on this, but I think this would be this is a good topic to talk with. Sam is your TA out there, and just to give you an idea of how the landscape works on this, a lot of the money comes from the federal government down through the state to local entities. So there's this, unless you're familiar with the local entities usually control that money. The counties or municipalities or the community action programs or whatever, because they have allocations that they receive ultimately it's from the federal government. That's where the source of all this money. But it's administered by the state, and then it goes down to all these local organizations. And it requires a knowledge of the local landscape to really know where that money is. And the other thing that we've run across, even in Minnesota, when we think we have a handle on that local landscape, is, the priority for them is public benefit. And they don't see manufactured home communities as serving a public benefit because of the way they're structured. So they'll put money into playgrounds or parks or, stuff that's obviously out there in providing a public service. And they're really reluctant to, because it's a scarcity model too. They don't have the money to put into what they consider private enterprises. So that's the obstacle we come across, is that the emphasis is on public service and public benefit, and manufactured home parks don't fall into that category. So it's really difficult to see that, to get them to see that there is a benefit to getting money into your community. You can do it, but it requires more work.
Yeah, part of it is, and I see your hand up, Natividad, too. Part of it is figuring out what the language is that the grantor needs to hear. So some of the magic words that are in the zeitgeist right now are sustainable, natural occurring, affordable housing. And so an entity might want to fund that for a community because they would see that as a public good. And I know in the comments, Marjorie pointed out that they just, excuse me, received $700,000. That was before my arrival at NCF. So maybe after Natividad, Marjorie would speak to how that where that money came from and how you connected with it.
So you can also connect with your colleges because they do have students who need to do their time for their volunteer time for grant writing. So that was one of the places that APAC has used resources from. We also did pay NCF to write our grant for our storm shelter. So we paid that above and beyond their normal pay. I think we paid them $1,800 for the total time. So that helped us a lot. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to do that ourselves because they had to not only do it once, but go back and re-ask for more money. So there's a lot of different free stuff that you can do as well. So it's just a matter of what it is you're looking for. And it starts with city, county, state, and federal. And so always ask your city what's available. Richfield has done a really great job at doing that. And so has Zombro Ridge and working with their city. And so unfortunately for the city of Fridley, they do not offer up anything, and Anoka County is tight on the money. And it goes to housing, stick-built housing versus manufactured housing, but we're trying to make change for that. So we have spent a good 10 years of our 12 years advocating for passing bills here at within our community by getting them to be involved in signing stuff and calling and having a lot of our senators and legislators come and visit us. So that always helps you too when you're trying to grant write. Invite more people out to come see what you're about.
Marjorie, are you on? Did you have any comment? Kathleen
Yeah,
referred to. Go ahead.
I can't think of the name of the grant program. Nativity Dad and Bev are probably more as far as to what the name of that program was. But Julie, former employee at NCF, she had assisted us with helping to apply for the infrastructure grant. Nativity Dad, do you know the name of what that program was? There was some bill that was just passed. Do you know the name of that?
No, I don't. It's been a while since we did it.
Yeah, okay.
So what Marjorie's referring to, Nick, is an allocation that the state legislature made, and put it into a grant, and it's a competitive grant, and this so it's, I don't know, several $1 million, and we helped Medelia apply for that money, and we did get paid for that too. I think we're going to get paid maybe, but so we helped write an application to that program. So it was a program that was already in place, and we were one of the authors of the legislation that helped to bring about that appropriation, but it came from the state of Minnesota. And so we were real familiar with it because we were lobbying to get this program established. And then the legislature said, okay, here's the money. And they established a program, and we applied for it, along with, I think, Medelia, and we're currently doing that for a couple other communities, right, in Minnesota, that have some infrastructure work that need to be done. But there was, this grant said specifically, it can only be used for this stuff, only for replacing sewer, water, or storm shelter, or something like that.
And it also includes all manufactured housing. It's not just for co-ops. So that's a really
Correct.
nice thing as well.
Correct. Private owners have access to that too.
So I would send you back to the research librarian who can at least tell you what's available in Wisconsin. And I think that we could provide some technical assistance on how to structure the grant application, or, proofread it or be a second pair of eyes. But I'm not sure what the grant landscape is in Wisconsin. I just don't know.
And Kathleen, would that also include when you're doing that too? I know we've done this before in the past, but as health and safety and the structure of low income, to be able to do a survey to offer up, depending upon what it is they're looking for on a grant. So it shows the amount of people who are low income, because that's what we're doing right now. Even for, mind you, just for a cooking class, we still have to do a survey. So we're giving them the old survey that we had to show that we are low income, because they have to turn that into the federal government, and that helps them get their funding, which gives us the funding. So
yeah, I think that we could help you out with getting all the constituent parts that you need to make your application legitimate. But I think that Rick's question is about who are the sources of funding. And that's a whole research project in and of itself. And as far as I know, we're not as up on what the opportunities in Wisconsin are as we are on what the opportunities in Minnesota are, simply because we've been involved at the legislative level as those things came online. That's why we know about them.
There's also corporations too, Rick. Like here we have 3M and Medtronic and any other, oh my goodness, I forget. There's 2 other ones that we've used in the past. So you can always go to your corporations as well. There's the $2,000 grant from the Rock Association, which is, you could use that for just about anything. I don't know if it's more than 2,000. Marjorie, can you fill that in? I don't remember. I think it's only 2,000.
2,000.
Yeah, but still, that's an opportunity for a $2,000 grant to maybe help you finish something. So there's all levels of grant searching that are right in front of your face that you would totally be surprised. There's a $500 grant that you can go to your local area and hit up all your little businesses. In fact, I do have a copy of that, and that's super easy because you can do that yourself and go to all your local businesses and say, we're looking for $500 from each business in our area to help do whatever it is you need to do. Because we actually had a resident write us up a letter for that. And unfortunately, she passed away and had started and got her first $500 yes from right across the street, from the corporation right across the street from us.
The place to start really is with that resource librarian, because you can search by keyword and that will tell you even family foundations and things like that. So we have some area foundations in Minnesota. Some of them are only interested in funding stuff for kids. Some are only interested in funding diversity programming. Some of them are only interested in funding music enrichment in schools. I mean, I don't know what, but you can search that database by keywords. So you could search by affordable housing, you could search by infrastructure, you could search by, we can help you brainstorm some terms, but a research librarian is going to be really skilled in helping you tailor that search.
So Kathleen, I want to honor our commitment here. We're at 7:30. Is there any sort of other wrap up you want to do, Kathleen, before you send us on our way?
I want to invite people to join us tomorrow night, and I'm still going to implore you to invite your neighbors to join you for tomorrow night's refinance. And then, of course, on Friday night, we'll be meeting in person. So that will be an excellent opportunity to meet in real life. If you cannot join us, I will be sending t-shirts and some swag out to you. So yeah, that's my wrap up. And Rick, we can talk offline too if you want to send me an email, and I can try and figure out what the area reference research libraries in your area are.
Oops, I thank you for that. Yes, I'll, and as you mentioned that, I'm thinking about different places I can go to do that, to find people for resources. I mean, like, I just realized that, my wife's cousin's administrator up at Marquette University, I'm sure they have something there, so it's, so, and we do have, again, some rather large universities within our community. So, it's, UW system is, rather big, so I can, hit people up there. So, okay, I thank you for that.
Okay, so write a grant. Hurry up and tell us what it's for. Good to see you, everybody.
Thank
See
you, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
See you tomorrow night.